Good morning and welcome to the 17th meeting of the Citizens Participation and Public Petitions Committee of 2025. Our first item is simply to agree that we'll take business in private in items 5 and 6 this morning. Are members content to agree about that and also look at our work programme at that point too? We are, thank you. That brings us to the second item on the agenda this morning, which is a very important evidence session on emergency cardiac care thematic petitions, and it's on cardiac and stroke care issues that have been raised across various petitions, and I'm delighted that we've been joined again as a semi-frequent member to our guest to our proceedings by the Minister for Public Health and Women's Health, Jenny Minto, and Scottish Government officials, Kylie Barclay, Senior Policy Manager and Long-Term Conditions Policy, Martin MacDonald, Stroke Senior Policy Manager, Long-Term Conditions Policy, and Will Wood, Unit Head, Long-Term Conditions Policy. Good morning and welcome to all of you. Thank you very much for joining us. Our evidence session this morning will cover recurring themes and issues emerging from the committee's consideration of petitions 1989 to increase defibrillators in public spaces and workplaces, and petition 2048 to review the fast stroke awareness campaign, petition 2067 to improve data on young people affected by conditions causing sudden cardiac death, and petition 2101 to provide defibrillators for all primary and secondary schools in Scotland. And very recently we had a roundtable discussion which teased out a number of the issues in relation to these petitions. I think it's left the committee kind of more convinced in some respects than in others, where I think we've been able to see that there were issues. I think in relation to schools, for example, we recognise a lot of modern schools now are being built outside of town and potentially aren't where a defibrillator might need to be. But at the same time, we're concerned that there is a map now of access to defibrillators across Scotland, and we can see that in certain areas, particularly Glasgow and the west of Scotland, there's an obvious deficiency. And this was a question I was able to put to the First Minister at the conveners group, and he was obviously, in one respect at least, he didn't agree to all aspects of the questioning we put, but recognised this was something that was not something of a postcode lottery, and that was not ideal in terms of people's ability to survive from these issues. So is there anything the Minister would like to say by way of an introduction, or are you happy for us to go to questions?
If I may, I've got a short
Please do, that's fine.
Thank you very much. So thank you for inviting me to provide evidence today. Addressing cardiac arrest, stroke and sudden cardiac death is very important to the Scottish Government, so I'm very pleased to be able to be here to talk to these petitions. I'd like to begin by focusing on the two petitions related to defibrillators. The Scottish Government works as part of the Save a Life for Scotland partnership to improve outcomes from out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. The partnership has made significant progress since 2015, and I'm really pleased to say that over 1 million people have been trained in CPR, achieving the target set out in our strategy. Also, bystander CPR rates and defibrillator usage have increased, and importantly, survival has increased. The petitioners highlight the importance of defibrillator provision and usage. The First Minister and I were pleased to meet recently with Roger and Leslie Hill, founders of the DH9 Foundation, in memory of David Hill. We discussed their proposal regarding the placement of defibrillators in schools. The First Minister asked that the DH9 Foundation and Save a Life for Scotland provide us with an agreed position on the best way to increase defibrillator availability and usage in Scotland. In response, our partners have recommended taking a data-driven and localised approach to increasing defib access. This means using PadMap to identify areas where defibs are most needed and working with local communities to place them effectively and to support increased awareness and confidence in their usage. Our partners were also clear about the importance of cardiac responder networks in areas where fixed defib positions may not be the best approach. We're We are considering how we can contribute to this shared vision of ensuring that communities across Scotland are prepared and supported to respond to cardiac arrest. Next, I would like to focus on the petition lodged by Sharon Duncan, David Hill's mother. This is focused on improving data relating to sudden cardiac death and the conditions associated with it. I strongly agree with the importance of this, and am pleased to make the committee aware that just yesterday Public Health Scotland published the Scottish Cardiac Audit Programme. This expanded report includes data on inherited cardiac conditions for the first time. In addition, the Cardiac Audit Programme has been working alongside the Inherited Cardiac Conditions Service in the West Coast of Scotland to develop a proof of concept for a sudden cardiac death registry. It's hoped that preliminary data will be included in next year's report. These are really important developments which I hope encourage the committee and Mrs Duncan that we are working to address the challenges relating to data on sudden cardiac death and conditions associated with it. Regarding the petition relating to the review of the Fast Stroke Awareness campaign, I very much welcome the work the Bundy family have undertaken. I met with them in May 2024 to discuss their campaign and was moved by their determination to improve awareness of stroke symptoms. Following a meeting with the family, the Cabinet Secretary asked the Stroke Speciality Advisor to the Chief Medical Officer to review stroke awareness education for clinical staff. This led to the development of an education package funded by the Scottish Government and delivered to over 1,500 staff in GP practices, emergency departments and the Scottish Ambulance Service. This education also covers the less common presentations of stroke, including symptoms relating to visual field defects and certain presentations of loss of balance. We will keep our position on stroke symptom awareness under review and be guided by the best evidence at all times. So I'd like to close by thanking all of the petitioners for raising these extremely important issues. They are ones which the Scottish Government and I take very seriously, and I hope that I've outlined for you today the steps that we are taking to address them. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister. And I mean, we're at that stage in the political cycle now where we're drawing together and looking for outcomes, because clearly Parliament is now moving to its close in March. And I would actually, on a personal level, like to applaud the proactive engagement that you have had with both of David Hill's parents, Roger and Sharon, and also with James Bundy and his family. These petitions were obviously motivated by particularly personal tragic circumstances, and I know that you actually have invested a degree of time in engaging with them and seeking to consult with them as you've evolved how the government might react and proceed. And that's where we're at now, I suppose, is just that business end of the various petitions that are before us. And I suppose I'm going to start off with the defibrillator access, usage and community response, because what the public access defibrillator placement map has identified is that there are gaps. I mean, there's a fantastically widespread availability. I think we can see that, as you outlined there, how much that has grown in the course of this Parliament. I think one of the interesting things, though, is to see that some of them don't get used very much, others get used more often. And I mean, that's interesting, because I think that points a bit to placement and where everything actually should ultimately be. But they are largely still relying upon community fundraising and generous external sponsorship. And that has been a successful strategy. It's allowed for the location of the defibrillators that we currently have. But when we look to these more deprived communities, and we can see in the map in Glasgow and the west of Scotland, is that a reasonable route to expect will meet the need to ensure that we don't have a postcode lottery? And I'm interested to know, how does the government plan to try and plug that gap? Is it through direct intervention and support? Is it through cajoling and trying to identify people who might be available to actually lead any efforts in communities, or people who might be generous enough to sponsor these units in those places, because clearly we don't want to find people living in areas just now where there is a gap in provision have less chance of surviving than those who live in areas where that provision has been more obviously achieved.
Thank you. Thank you for acknowledging the importance of listening to people with lived experience in the role that I carry out, which is very much clearly public health and women's health focused. I think the best decisions or the best support that we can get is from people that have experienced trauma and also positive experiences within healthcare. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that. I think the session that you had with Stephen Short from Save a Life for Scotland, Kirsty Morrison from Chest Heart Stroke Scotland and Kim Kestel from British Heart Foundation was a really important session where you were able to tease out from them a lot of very detailed information as to the work that has been going on with regard to our out-of-hospital cardiac arrests. And I think I represent Argyll and Bute, which has a wide footprint, less urban areas. But when I was first elected, hearing about the decisions on where defibrillators were or the volume of them were on islands, it was one per, I think, 1,000 of the population, which in theory would mean that Mull would only have 3. But if you look at the expanse of Mull, then that community recognised that they needed an awful lot more. So they did a lot of community fundraising for that, and I recognise that across Scotland. I'd also like to commend the support that we get from the British Heart Foundation around the support of helping people to purchase defibrillators for their community. I think it's clear that one size doesn't fit all, which came through on the evidence that you heard from Stephen Short and also Kim Kestel. And I think the PAD map is a great help in allowing us to focus where there is need. I think it was Kim that stated that people living in the more deprived areas of Scotland are more likely to experience an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. Therefore, there is a need to have defibrillators in that area. So I think, Jackson, you specifically asked about what the Scottish Government is doing. Well, as you heard from Stephen Short, we are very much active partners within Save a Life for Scotland. And as I noted in my opening remarks, as a result of the meeting that Save a Life for Scotland recently had with David and Leslie Hill, we have had a submission from them which we are currently going through, and we will make decisions on the best way for the Scottish Government to support ensuring we have the right placement of defibs across Scotland in all types of our vast and beautiful geography.
Okay. I mean, you mentioned Stephen Short there, and one of the points that he made was, because what we can see is that, well, I've got which way round to put these. He made the point that community responder units might be another way of trying to ensure that we get quick access to individuals. How does the Scottish Government think it might look to expand and sustain community responder schemes and just give confidence in CPR defibrillator use? I mean, there's clearly the knowledge, we all know, that early bystander intervention can make a tremendous difference in terms of a successful outcome. So I was quite impressed with the way he articulated that as a potential route, but how does that suggestion and that thought become something that's more of an implemented strategy? Yeah,
if I may indulge in me, I can refer back to my own constituency. And at the Isla show, I met with the community responders, which again has been a local community set up, led by a couple of retired GPs that have pulled in people that are interested, clearly you have a retained fire service, you also have the Coast Guards and the lifeboat as well. So there are people that are very much community orientated there, and as a result they have community responders. And we were talking exactly about that, the cost of ensuring that the responder has the right equipment to allow them to respond quickly. That's something I'm very aware of from my own constituency. Part of the work that we've been looking at with Save a Life for Scotland is also understanding, and I think Stephen Short talked about this as well, is how you have the right coordination across Scotland, and so that communities understand what they need to be able to do, how to learn. And again, I know of a retired nurse that has supported her community to ensure that the knowledge and the training is maintained for the community to be able to respond to those having an out-of-hospital cardiac arrest. So it's very much engaging with the community and through Save a Life for Scotland with all their stakeholders, which include COSLA as well, who I know that David Russell specifically asked about how local action, local community areas and planning groups could support this. So I think that's very important. It's that collaboration which I'm aware that Stephen Short talked about. I know you had a bit of a dialogue with him with regards to training young people and those of us that are slightly more advanced. And I mean, I can remember I was in the Brownies, so I can remember getting the CPR training there and also in the guides. And then more recently at a walking football event in Glasgow. I thought that Stephen Short's comment about as long as you know the basics, then if you're on the phone, then you're prompted by the call handler as to what you should be doing. So again, that gives confidence. So I suppose what I'm saying, it's everybody needs to be involved, all the stakeholders, whether it's Scottish Ambulance Service, the fire service, and I reflected as well on my own community on Isla, pulling people in, and the Scottish Government, through the connection that we have with Save a Life for Scotland, is very much looking at the proposals that they have sent us just now.
Thank you. And Fergus Young will be pursuing some of the training issues later on. You were obviously in the Brownies later than I was in the Cub Scouts. We just did a lot of marching. However, David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Minister and officials. Minister, my questions are around sudden cardiac death research and data coordination. How will the Scottish Government ensure that existing data on PAD, locations, out-of-hospital cardiac arrest incidents and cardiac outcomes is effectively shared, accessible and used across all relevant agencies to support strategic planning and improve survival rates?
Thank you, David, for that question. On Friday, I was at Public Health Scotland's annual review, and Public Health Scotland collect a wealth of data across healthcare. And as I indicated in my opening remarks, the Scottish Cardiac Audit was just published yesterday, which includes some additional information on out-of-hospital cardiac arrests. So this is the first year that that has been included, but that is something that we recognise the importance of. So, as you've pointed out in your question, allow us to plan better the pathways and the support that we can give communities. So I'm very pleased that Public Health Scotland are able to collect this. We're hoping that the next stage will be that actually health boards will be able to feed in directly to that as opposed to a two-stage approach. So I think that's really positive. And again, as I say, that will help Scottish Government, but also health boards to understand more about the needs within their communities.
My second question is covering a bit of that, Minister, around what steps will be taken to strengthen research into sudden cardiac deaths, inherited cardiac conditions and behavioural barriers to bystanders' interventions so that evidence can guide policy development public health campaigns and targeted interventions?
Okay, so there's quite a lot in that question. And I think Kim Kestel from British Heart Foundation gave you very good evidence on the research that the British Heart Foundation are doing, which the Scottish Government is very pleased to support. We also have the Chief Scientist Office, who is in charge of research that happens into health within Scotland, and she is very open to receiving applications from organisations and universities to do specific research into heart conditions. But I think alongside the data, the actual research that we can do within Scotland, given our population, I think is really important.
Other questions, Convener?
And just following up on Kim Kestel's point there, I mean, she felt that we still had provision for, we had potentially thousands of defibrillators we don't really know about, potentially mapped and logged. What can we do to try and encourage that process to take place?
So I think we, sitting around the table as MSPs, have all got a responsibility there. There was a debate a few months ago in Parliament about that, explaining the importance of ensuring that the defibrillator in your area is logged on to the circuit, which, as Stephen Short talked about, is how the Scottish Ambulance Service can direct people to the closest defibrillator in the area. I was in Oban last Friday visiting the Happy Wee Gym, and outside on their wall is they have got a defibrillator there. So it's ensuring that these defibrillators that are dotted around communities are well known as to where they are. And
I mean, I agree. I mean, MSPs and others, MPs could do something to help promote this. Is there a graphic available that we could actually post online and in other areas that would encourage community groups to register a defibrillator if that hasn't already happened, or to check to see if their defibrillator is registered? And if there isn't a graphic, could something be produced that it might be possible for us to endeavour to use as a tool that would allow us to try and encourage that registration?
I'm certainly happy to take that away. We normally do tweets and things round about raising awareness times, but very happy to take that away. Of course, you've also got access to the pad map as well, so there's ability to tweet the code for that as well, or the URL for that.
I think it would be one of the positive outcomes that the committee could certainly encourage our parliamentary colleagues to involve themselves, because I think there isn't a parliamentarian who hasn't probably had cause to engage with this issue during the course of the Parliament, but as perhaps not quite sure thereafter what more they can do, and something constructive like that I think would be appreciated.
It's a great idea.
Yeah, okay. Maurice Goldham.
Thank you, Convener. Minister, given the UK National Screening Committee's planned review of evidence on population screening for sudden cardiac death, I'm wondering what role the Scottish Government might play, and moreover what additional steps the Scottish Government is taking to improve data collection, classification and public reporting of sudden cardiac deaths, particularly in young people.
Great. Thank you for your question. As you know, I and also the Cabinet Secretary have written to the Screening Committee, and we understand that it's an independent body, but we understand that in the next 3 years they will be reviewing evidence. The evidence has to be robust, it has to be peer-reviewed, so we are pleased that that is in their programme of work. We are already looking to see if they do make that decision, what we can be doing. I think it was really clear when Kim Kestel answered this question along the screening side of things. It's not just the screening. We need to ensure that we've got the pathways in the various health boards to ensure that they can support people that are perhaps screened and may have a condition. So that's work that we do on a regular basis with the health boards. Data, I think, I've touched on previously. The Public Health Scotland Scottish Cardiac Audit was released yesterday, and that is continuing to it's an iterative process to ensure that we are collecting the right data, and that has extended this year being the first year with additional information in it about I'm going to say congenital, if I can use that word, inherited cardiac conditions.
Thank you. I appreciate it's an independent review, and 3 years is an awful long time, perhaps. What is the Scottish Government's current assessment on how effective screening might be in terms of preventing sudden cardiac death, but also in terms of any false positives and perhaps negative results as a consequence of screening?
So one of the outcomes of the meeting that the First Minister and I had with David and Leslie Hill was to understand clearly what Sport Scotland are doing, and they have got some guidelines, and then also the professional, so the Rugby Association, also the Football Association have got clear pathways to ensure that people participating in sport have got the right health care that and monitoring that they need. I was very struck in that meeting with with some work that the Hills had been doing in monitoring young children that had been playing sport. And that's something that we've been looking at just in preparation if there is a change in the NSC guidelines.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you, Minister.
June?
Just following up from Mr Golden's question, I mean, 3 years is a long time. I mean, has the Scottish Government recommended that the NSC speed this up?
So I thank Mr Ewing for the question. As I said, the NSC is an independent body. Our Chief Medical Officer is represented on it, along with the other 3 Chief Medical Officers. I think the fact that we have written emphasises the interest that the Scottish Government has in their work timetable. But I think, as I've said earlier, the NSC makes decisions based on robust evidence that has been peer reviewed, and I think we need to ensure that that process is followed properly and correctly.
Mm. Okay, I mean, I can understand that, but the NSC submission of the 9th of May 24 said there wasn't enough evidence because there wasn't a predictive test, there was insufficient understanding of genetic risk, and they didn't really know what to do with people after screening anyway. It was all a bit negative. What do you think? I mean, it's really saying we don't really know much about it, there's no way we can find out what to do about it, and we don't know what to do about it even if after we've had screening. It just seems, for a national body to come up with 3 reasons for doing nothing, all of which are themselves an admission of we don't know, it just seems to be lacking and not what we would expect from a distinguished national body with eminent people serving on it.
So I understand the concerns that you've raised, Mr Ewing, and I think that is certainly that response prompted us to start thinking about if that decision was changed, then what do we need to do in Scotland, working with clinicians to ensure that we have the right processes. So that's the work that we're looking at. So their questions prompted us into a review as to if they do change in 3 years' time, what we do.
Could I just ask, following up on that as well? I mean, obviously, one of the things we were struck by, and you will be aware of, is the experience in Italy, where they have the screening and have had now for a long time into those who are involved in sport, and it's led to, I think it was an astonishing, something like 89% reduction in young people who have subsequently died of cardiac failure in consequence. I take it this is part of what is the subject of that review. It seemed quite a compelling success story for that country, particularly for the families of those whose children, as a consequence, are with us still, as opposed to elsewhere and here, where that is not the case. And I just wonder. I mean, obviously, the thing it's difficult sometimes to do is to quantify in numbers in relation to all those that are screened. But it does seem to me to place a premium value on the life of young people, particularly at an age when we know they're going to be engaging and more likely to be engaging in that kind of sport. And I think the committee were kind of very impressed with that.
Yes, and I was too. And I think that's why it's important that we, Public Health Scotland, are now gathering the inherited cardiac conditions information to allow us to shift, and also gathering the information from Sport Scotland as to what is done through the sports, which is why, as I referenced earlier, the information that David and Leslie Hill gave us at the First Minister's meeting was very compelling, and one that we're looking at.
Sorry, Mr. Ewing.
No, I'm grateful for your intervention, Fiona, because you remind me about the submission that we got from the Consulate General of Italy on 13th March 25, and maybe I could ask the Minister she could have another look at this hereafter, because should it not be that the National Screening Committee, from whom we haven't heard since April 24, have a good look at the evidence from Italy, which is pretty overwhelming, that particularly with young active athletes, that a screening programme was tremendously effective. And it wouldn't be a difficult thing to do, surely, to implement a pilot's programme screening for young athletes, perhaps via various sporting associations. I mean, I entirely accept your commitment to this, and I'm impressed by your general approach to it. I should say that, so I'm not meaning to give you a hard time today. I just think we all feel we haven't quite bottomed out this topic yet, and to do justice to the petitioners, we're willing to work with you in order to try to get something actually done, not just the NSC doing the square root of diddly squat till the end of the decade.
I appreciate the questions, and I think it's important for us to get the right results for Scotland when it comes to healthcare. So robust questions are fine, Mr Ewing, and if I can't answer them, then I'm very happy to respond in writing. But I will take away what you've just said about reviewing the evidence from the Italian situation. And also, I believe Denmark was highlighted as another area. So I'm very content to have a look at that, and then we can respond back to the committee with our thoughts, and also, if you may, allow me to get some clinical views on these as well.
Well, you must be clairvoyant. I was just going to ask you about Denmark. I have to say I don't have a particularly clairvoyant relationship with many ministers, so I'm very happy. Very happy to begin the
ESP and all of that,
which will be very exciting.
Give some good fortune to ministers, I suspect, Mr. Ewing.
Thanks for that. But to be serious, Denmark was cited in moving on to training as an example of good practice, and because they embedded CPR training in schools, it was mandatory, and by law, the law said kids have to get this training, and at an early age. And although there's some contra-evidence from research that has been brought to our attention, nonetheless, the question, I guess, is, and it was raised by Kim Kestel from the British Heart Foundation in the submission to us, that Scotland was the only nation in the UK where CPR is neither mandated in the school curriculum nor tracked through reporting. Now, I know that each local authority says they're committed to doing this, but I mean, would it not just be simpler if we just mandated it and then everybody has to do it? We all know exactly where we are, and we can judge the outcomes by virtue of a clear law, not an aspiration that we hope local authorities will do nice things at some nice time in the future.
So I'm sure Mr Ewing is aware of the very impressive and thought-provoking time for reflection that we heard from Cameron McGarr in the chamber a few weeks ago. I happen to be sitting beside the Cabinet Secretary for Education and also the Cabinet Secretary for Health. And the three of us have written to Cameron. I was hoping, we haven't heard it, I was hoping to hear where that had got to, but the letter has been sent. We're hoping, if not all three, certainly a group of us to meet with Cameron just to hear what more from him about the importance that he recognised of the need of ensuring that young children do get that CPR training. I also have had the privilege of meeting a father and son, and it was through the son's training at school in early secondary and then slightly later on in secondary that saved his father's life. So I do recognise the importance of that. Education, as you'll appreciate, doesn't sit within my portfolio, but I am content to speak more with the Cabinet Secretary for Education around this, and again we can come back to the committee once we've met Cameron McGarr.
Finally, and again, Minister, you must be capable of reading my mind, which is an alarming prospect for you, I think, really. But I was going to ask about Cameron McGarr because in the notes we've had, it was brought to our attention that the Cabinet Secretary of Education, after Cameron delivered the time for reflection, wrote to Cameron to offer to meet. So I wonder if, I mean, you've already alluded to the fact that this is being pursued, for which I'm grateful, but I wonder if once it has been pursued, you could alert the committee to what is happening. But just to get back to you know, the real topic, and I appreciate that you don't have portfolio responsibility because it's education. I mean, would it not really just be simpler if every child had to learn this at school? I think I learned it when I was 45, just by happenance. I was in a mountain rescue team, which is a strange way to learn it, but I suppose better than nothing. But it just shows the sort of random way in which people at the moment are learning about CPR, and would it not be best that every child, like Denmark does, learns about it in primary school?
So I'm content to take that away and have that conversation with the Cabinet Secretary. And I think you're right. In different areas of Scotland, you get different training. I've highlighted RNLI, people maybe going into schools. St John, I know, have got a really good plan to go into schools as well to support them. But I completely understand where you're coming from.
Thank you.
Ross Golden, you wanted to come in just briefly again.
Yeah, thank you, Convener. And Minister, hopefully another helpful suggestion following on from Mr Ewing. I'm conscious I'm a UFSC licence of football coaching, and as part of that journey, there is online element of first aid training, but CPR isn't included in that. Now, every coach of football in Scotland must do the 1.1 and do first aid as part of that. But I wonder if you would commit to engaging with the SFA and the Scottish women's football on perhaps including CPR as part of that coaching pathway, as a way of, you know, schools is a good point, but this is another mechanism in which we can get the message out there in a structured environment.
Very happy to have that engagement, and I think from a public health perspective we've got very good relationships with Scottish Women's Football. They supported us with a vaping campaign as well, anti-vaping campaign, so very happy to do that.
Just before I bring in Davy Russell, I rather self-deprecatingly at the last meeting pointed out that it's great that young people, because it seems to be a skill once learned is a skill retained, but those of us of slightly older years who were actively trained in CPR here in the Parliament, with the passage of time, I think I suggested that knowledge had perhaps ebbed slightly. And I don't know whether I'm just now somebody who is of an age who should hope just to be saved in the event anything happens, or whether I'm still somebody who should be actively trained to save others. But how do you, I mean, and I know there were prompt notes, and I mean, Stephen Short said, I should be reassured that actually the training I had is probably instinctively retained, and with prompt notes I would find I was able to actively participate again. But is there anything more that can be done to refresh skills, do you think, in those who have actually taken the time initially to invest in trying to train in the first place?
So, right at the start of the session, we talked about the importance of community engagement and ensuring that, you know, the community has that guardian, I think is the way that Stephen Short and others described it. So it's that ensuring within the community you have that continual refreshment. And as I spoke earlier, if you're on the phone, then you are getting the prompt to tell you what to do. I would suggest, Jackson, if you fancied, there's a lot of events that happen around Scotland. I highlighted the walking football one that I was at, and St John were there giving support alongside, I'm going to say the Stroke Association, might have been Chest Heart Stroke Scotland, but there is in an awful lot of events, and certainly a lot of the agricultural shows that I go around within Argyll and Bute, there is that opportunity for people to get refreshed. And then there's also very good online resources as well from the Save a Life for Scotland website.
Thank you for that. And I mean, if you're seeking to encourage me to attend events where exercise is involved, you will have the wholehearted support of Mrs Carlow, even if I'm slightly more reluctant. David Russell.
Before I move on to the next theme, just in a previous answer that it was highlighted there that in some of the deprived areas there could be better coverage with the defibrillators. But I know that recently in my constituency I was involved in 3 charity days where they raised, I can't remember the actual sum, but it was a few £1,000s, and they were match funded and they got their defib in one day. But that's going to be much harder where it's a deprived area. They're worrying about putting dinner on the table for the kids and things. And I was wondering, is there a mechanism there that you could put the match funding in rather than the community because of the situation that the people are in the poorer communities?
So I think that's a really important question, and I think the question that you asked the previous panel tied into that as well. And I think, and I know you recognise this, that local authorities know very much their communities and who are the key drivers within different parts of their communities, whether that's in the more deprived areas or the more the less deprived areas. So I think there is definitely the partnership working there. And COSLA, as you know, are part of Save a Life for Scotland. I think the other important thing that Stephen Short touched upon as well is that quite often businesses are willing to get involved as well with supporting fundraising, and as our British Heart Foundation. So we, as I've said earlier, we are looking at a paper that was worked on at the last Save a Life for Scotland meeting, and we will be taking decisions based on that.
Thank you. Right. The theme that I'm going to question you on is public awareness and education around stroke. Given that only half of stroke patients received the full treatment bundle last year, falling short of national performance targets, what plans does the Scottish Government have to increase the investment in the stroke services, including workforce capacity, infrastructure and access to timely evidence-based care?
Thank you for that question. I was very disappointed to read these statistics that have come out recently on the stroke bundles. And I agree there is improvement that has to be made. Just last week, I chaired a round table of all the stroke leads from the health boards across Scotland, where we talked specifically about door-to-needle time as being one of the major concerns. And what we have done with the health boards is look at how their staff are configured. So, for example, we have introduced or helped them to introduce nurses that will specifically support people that could be presenting with stroke symptoms. And I think I'm right in saying it's NHS Lanarkshire has made really good improvements on this. And at the meeting last week, it was great to hear what NHS Lanarkshire has been able to do, and then also ensure that the other health boards were hearing about that as well and the changes that they can make. So the Scottish Government provided some funding to allow these additional training for nurses across the health boards. But as you'll know, the Scottish Government provides funding to health boards directly. Total health budget is about £21 billion. Of that, about £15 billion goes directly to health boards, and it is for them to make the decisions as to how they allocate that amongst the various conditions that they've got to support. But I felt very strongly, having met with the Bundy family, but also with Stroke Association and Chest Heart Stroke Scotland, that it was important that each health board had a stroke lead, and that I met with them regularly. Also within the Scottish Government, we have a stroke specialist that supports the chief, that's part of the Chief Medical Officer's team, and he engages very regularly with the stroke leads to ensure that we can improve, because that's what we have to do. You're absolutely right. We have to improve these statistics.
Just that it's such a big disparity between the 50% and, you know, is it an aspirational target rather than an achievable, challenging target? And that's maybe what you need to look at as well, you know.
So it's a target. If a target is challenging, then that's great, because that then challenges the people to ensure...
Aspirational targets that can't be achieved as opposed to, you know, a target that's still achievable. You know, you need to drive staff on, you know.
I absolutely agree, and these targets would have been set with clinical advice and guidance, and I think targets should be stretched, because we do want people in Scotland to be healthy and to maintain healthy lifestyle. And I think from people that I have met that are living with stroke, some have had better journeys than others, and that's the way that we learn. And it's sharing these stories widely amongst MSPs and more broadly across Scotland that change can happen. But I was very heartened by the meeting that I chaired last week, because I was hearing a group of people that had the same determination to reach these targets.
What actions is the Scottish Government taking to improve awareness and recognition of the full range of stroke symptoms beyond those captured by the FAST acronym among both the public and the healthcare professionals? Does the Scottish Government plan to support a pilot study to test the public comprehension and clinical impact of BFAST, and will findings from NHS Forth Valley's adoption of BFAST be incorporated into future policy decisions?
Okay, thank you for these questions, and it's something that I've had a number of conversations with officials about, and also third sector, so Chest Heart Stroke Scotland and the Stroke Association. As you'll know, Chest Heart Stroke Scotland had an awareness campaign either late last year or earlier this year, which was based on the FAST guidelines. As a result, as I mentioned in my introduction, as a result of the Cabinet Secretary meeting with the Bundy family, he asked the Chief Medical Officer to do a piece of work on this, and as a result, we have provided and funded an education resource, which 1,500 people have gone through. Now, that's people from emergency departments, GP practices, and wider healthcare to ensure that they are aware of the symptoms, but also ones that aren't in the FAST acronym, which might be around balance or visual impairment. So that work has been done and is continuing.
Thank you.
Minister, what is it that causes you to hesitate on the BFAST programme?
So I think what we need to be aware of is that the FAST is very well known. And bringing in additional, the BE, the balance and the eyes, could produce some false positives, which we would be concerned may impact on the actual ability for the clinicians to be able to treat. So, which is why we've been very clear in this additional training resource, is that we are focusing on the FAST, but also ensuring that people are aware that there could be other symptoms. And as I say, I think the evidence that we've had and the discussions that I've had with Stroke Association and Chest Heart Stroke Scotland, their views tie in with this.
It's something that will continue to be reviewed. I mean, obviously,
yes,
as we see these pilots and things, because
most definitely. And as Davy highlighted, there's a pilot happening in Forth Valley. We haven't had any outcomes from that, and I note also that Ayrshire and Arran are considering this.
I'm grateful for that, because what we don't want is for an impression of intransigence to be given, rather than this is something that others may have moved to at this stage, and we don't dismiss the possibility of the value of it, but we're not at the point where we think that's the right step to take at this point. And there's a distinction, I think, between the way these two things are coloured.
Yeah, and I absolutely agree. There is certainly no intransigence. Davy was pressing me very hard on the targets. They are there because we expect to meet them. But like everything, as knowledge changes, then we need to be flexible enough to ensure that we are providing people of Scotland with the right support for their health.
Thank you. Yes, Fergus.
Just to pursue that point, Convener, and the questions pursued by Mr Lawrence on BFAST as opposed to FAST, on including balance and eyes, visual and balance problems. And of course, this was what caused the petitioner's death. So we're talking about people dying because FAST doesn't pick up necessarily those symptoms. So on the fourth pilot, just a couple of points. When will it be completed? When will it be reported on? And will the report cover the reservations about moving from FAST to BFAST? And putting it maybe a little bit too crudely, the reservations were, one, just bear with me, the public were too stupid to understand BFAST because there was too much information for the public to grasp. That's basically what the experts say. FAST, there's 4 things to remember, 6 is too much. Well, I don't think so. But can that be specifically analysed in the 4th study? Because if not, the pilot would be a bit of a waste of time. And secondly, the point I think you just made, the second criticism was that BFAST may result in a very large number of people being referred to a hospital for no purpose, really, because there's nothing really wrong with them. And I mean, that seems to be, would cause an increased workload to already stretched health services. Now, I mean, that's a practical point, and I accept that. But what I'm asking is, in this pilot, will these 2 arguments be tested out? Because if they're not tested out, we're arguably, you know, a sceptic would say, we're not really much further forward, and we've missed the opportunity for the pilot to analyse whether these two objections are real or overstated by clinicians and experts.
A very fair question to ask. As it's the Health Board that's taking forward the pilot, I have no information as to when it will be complete or when we will get that report from them. However, your questions are all on record, and Martin's here with me today, and we will converse with Forth Valley just to find out, just to understand what they're doing, where they are within the pilot, and when we can expect the report.
We're all in favour of conversing. Thank you.
Any colleagues have any further questions? Ministers, is there anything you'd like to add further?
No, I'd just like to say thank you very much, and I very much appreciate the evidence that you were able to gather at your previous session. So
well, can I thank you again for the positive engagement across these issues. We've been considering 4 petitions today. Petition 1989, lodged by Mary Montague, who happens to be the provost of my own local authority, although she lodged a petition prior to that happy event to increase defibrillators in public spaces and workplaces occasioned by a situation that tragically affected her own family. Petition number 2048 to review the fast stroke awareness campaign from the Bundy family. Again, a petition motivated by tragic circumstances that affected their family. Petition number 2067 to improve data on young people affected by conditions causing sudden cardiac death, lodged by Sharon Duncan, the mother of David Hill. Again, a petition lodged before us because of the personal circumstances that they endured. And petition 2101 to provide defibrillators for all primary and secondary schools in Scotland, lodged by Peter Earl on behalf of Traquair Primary School, because of the work that they'd done. And I want to commend all of these petitioners, really, for ensuring that these issues have been thoroughly and properly aired by the committee, and thank the Minister for her engagement in the way that we have taken them forward, and that she is engaged with them. In that case, members, are we happy to consider the evidence we've heard today at a future meeting? We are, and so thanking you again, Minister, and your colleagues. We'll suspend briefly. Thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome back. The next item on our agenda under item 3, consideration of continued petitions, is petition number 1876 to accurately record the sex of people charged or convicted of rape or attempted rape, lodged by Lucy Hunter Blackburn, Lisa Mackenzie and Kath Murray. And the petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to require Police Scotland, the Crown Office and the Scottish Court Service to accurately record the sex of people charged or convicted of rape or attempted rape. Now, I should explain that the Citizens' Participation in Public Petitions Committee has considered the above petition throughout the current parliamentary session. This is indeed one of our longest running petitions that was lodged in this session, and the committee has been pursuing extensive work on it since it was lodged back in 2021. We have a large volume of petitions, and our practice is to do a considerable amount of work on every admissible petition, securing a research briefing, a government response and committee consideration for each one. We also try and progress the ask of petitions on behalf of petitioners as far as we are able. We're not the government, we are a committee of the Parliament. To ensure fairness for all our petitions and petitioners, we consider them in turn, which sometimes means there can be a wait after a petition is considered before it can be rescheduled. Now, at its meeting on the 30th of October 2024, the committee agreed that it would be appropriate to invite the Chief Constable to give evidence at a future meeting. The committee doesn't hear evidence on every petition, in fact takes evidence on relatively few of the petitions that come before us. As a result, we want to make sure we get the most out of any sessions where we are hearing from a witness. After issuing our invitation to Police Scotland, we were advised they were a full review of the policy on recording sex and gender, and that this was due to conclude this autumn. To make sure that we could use this valuable opportunity to hear from the Chief Constable as effectively as possible, we agreed as a committee to wait until the autumn of 2025 to take the evidence. And I am delighted and pleased to say that we are joined today by the Chief Constable, Joe Farrell, and by the Deputy Chief Constable, Alan Spears, Professionalism and Enabling Services. And a warm welcome to you both. And I understand the Chief Constable would like to make a brief opening statement before we move to questions from the committee. Chief Constable.
Convener, good morning committee. Police Scotland supports the petition. A man who rapes or attempts to rape a woman, girl or other victim is, should be and will be recorded by Police Scotland as a male. Gender self-identification is a complex area of public policy and practice, as illustrated by the work of this committee. The debate has evolved over a number of years, but let me be clear. My priority is to protect victims. Statistics and data accuracy matter, and we will always engage in a way which aligns to our values. The petitioners outline that in 2019, Police Scotland established a position on these matters. Our 2019 position stated that Police Scotland recorded the biological sex or gender identity of an individual based on self-declaration unless, first, the sex or gender of a person was relevant to an investigation, as would be the case in sexual violence crimes, including rape and attempted rape, or second, further inquiry was necessary on the basis of risk. In December 2021, the issue was discussed during evidence to the Criminal Justice Committee on the prosecution of violence against women and girls. Police Scotland stated at that time that there have never been a case of a male who committed rape and self-identified as a female being recorded on the police crime system as a female, and that remains the case. On reflection, and having observed the intense public debate around gender identification and the at times mixed messages from Police Scotland, for example, in freedom of information responses and correspondence to this committee, I wanted to provide further clarity and direction in this area. It was important for victims to hear from me as Chief Constable that there is no doubt in our practice. A man committing a rape will be recorded as a male. I've also put myself in the shoes of our custody sergeants and considered the support they needed to do their job. So in September 2024, during a public update at the Scottish Police Authority Board, I made a clear statement and direction that a man who commits rape or serious sexual assault will be recorded by Police Scotland as a male. That meeting was live streamed by the authority and was published, and we published the statement on this matter on our website, along with a series of internal communications for officers and staff. At my direction, Police Scotland commenced a review to consider the terminology and recording practices we use to collect and record sex and gender data and recommend improvements. This work is under the direction of Assistant Chief Constable Katrina Payton and supported by an expert human rights advisor with extensive engagement with a broad range of internal and external stakeholders. Our review takes account of the UK government-commissioned independent review on data, statistics and research on sex and gender by Professor Alice Sullivan, published in March 2025, which makes clear public bodies need reliable and consistent data based on biological sex to inform policy and practice. Our review also takes account of the Supreme Court decision on the definition of the terms sex, man, woman, and male and female in the Equality Act of 2010, which was handed down in April of this year. The broad work of our review is at an advanced stage and work continues at pace. We are implementing guidance as it is developed and we have communicated updates in this regard. In mid-October, as a result of this work, Police Scotland took the decision that we will record a person's biological sex and, where relevant, their transgender status for suspects and victims of all crimes and offences, and this is in accordance with our equality and human rights obligations. We're moving at pace to implementation across our data recording systems. The review will continue to be responsive and informed by developments in law and statutory guidance, human rights advice and ongoing engagement. We will continue to take action on specific areas and I expect to provide further substantial update through the Police Authority early next year, including progress on updating systems. Let me close by underlining that my priority is to protect the safety, well-being, rights and dignity of victims, witnesses, those accused, as well as my officers and staff. Thank you.
Thank you, Chief Constable, for that. That's very helpful, and I'm sure will help inform colleagues as we proceed. I would also just intimate that we've been joined by our parliamentary colleagues Tess White, Ruth Maguire and Rachel Hamilton this morning. And after the committee have asked questions, time permitting, I hope to be able to invite them to ask a question that they might feel hasn't been properly addressed. Chief Constable, I listened to all that with interest and care, and I'm grateful to it. Was there an underlying admission there that Police Scotland got something wrong, and if so, why?
As I outlined in the opening address, I felt that there needed to be greater clarity brought to our position in terms of recording in relation to rape and sexual offences. And that's what I did, both in terms of my announcement and communication in September 2024 at the Police Authority Board, putting myself in the shoes of the people who are making those decisions on making those decisions, and then further develop the work in terms of the review that I've talked about and that you referenced.
And how did that lack of clarity come about, and how did the position evolve to be in the situation that you felt therefore needed to have further work done to clarify it?
I felt that our 2019 statement, which I outlined in the opening, where it talks about allowing people the opportunity to self-identify, I felt at that point that people who are very interested and scrutinise this area of practice, policy and practice, then almost there was potential to disregard the second part of the statement that said if it's relevant to the offence, then we would record based on biological sex. So what I wanted to do in the autumn of 24, make it absolutely clear what the position was in relation to rape and sexual offences, and that being part of your petition.
And did Police Scotland act without giving due thought at the time, do you think, to disquiet that might be consequential as a result of the kind of statement that came out in 2019? I mean, what was the motivation at that point?
Well, I would be commenting on the situation across Scotland ahead of my tenure as the Chief Constable. I think in my opening I highlight that this area is a complex area of public policy and practice, and there are very strong opposing views.
Thank you. David Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Chief Constable, Deputy Chief Constable. Do you think police officers feel confident in how they record the sex of suspects in rape and attempted rape cases? And what guidance has been given to police officers to help them?
So I'm confident that they are confident, and the reason I say that is because if we look at our data in relation to the recording of men accused of sexual offences, rape and sexual offences, there have been 16,258 offences recorded on our crime system since 2018, and every one of those has been recorded accurately. That is a biological man who has committed or suspected of committed that offence, and that is how they've been recorded. So I am confident, because the data is the evidence that our staff are able to make those judgments and make the correct judgment and record accurately.
No further questions, Convener.
And in this, so far as officers are confident in how they proceed, is it now the case, therefore, that the same criteria are applied in relation to the policy of all sexual offences, and that there is no distinction in this regard?
Sorry,
in terms of the specification of gender. I mean, there is now a consistent policy in all sexual crimes.
So I talked about rape and sexual offences, so a broad category. And I don't know whether now you want me to talk about the further work that we've done and some of our further policy decisions.
I think that would be helpful, and then I'll bring in Fergus Ewing.
Okay, so what I'll do is DCC Spears has led the review work, so I'll ask him to take the committee through the scope of that work and the decisions we've made, and that will provide you with the answer in terms of our further steps in this area.
Thank you. I think to start at the end, and as part of your question, the decision that we made in October of this year, I think is significant, and that we would want in every instance where we're recording a crime or offence that we would record the biological sex of the person coming into custody. To ensure that progresses with pace, we will implement changes to the key systems where we would record that data. So for me, that brings a further degree of absolute clarity and removes ambiguity much further. When we commenced the review work, we've seen that there's 4 critical areas that we wanted to look at. One was around terminology, another was around data recording, legal compliance, and then I guess the acid test for the work that we were trying to do was what was the operational effectiveness of the policies that we put in place. It's been helpful that we've been able to look at the work of Alice Sullivan. We've been able to look at the outcome from the Supreme Court judgment. and we recognise that there's other pieces of work still ongoing. So you will see from our systems that right now we would define all of our guidance as interim, and we just wait for final clarity on some of that work that's ongoing. So we have, through that review work, looked at terminology. We have taken a position most recently around data recording. We have addressed search, both in terms of search on the street and search within custody. We've looked at the whole position around safe spaces. So the work that the oversight group has done has been really thorough in our view. It hasn't quite reached a completion yet, but we're working towards that. And I think an important part that we've encouraged has been about stakeholder engagement. And we do recognise it's a polarising context. There's varying views. So we have worked hard to draw on views from others as it relates to that. So we will, in the early part of 2026, as the Chief Constable take a bit of a final report to our police authority, as well as an upgrade on the implementation and changes that we'll make to our recording systems.
Thank you. Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, Convener, and good morning, Chief Constable and colleagues. Just listening to the Deputy Chief Constable there, my understanding now is that the position of the police has fundamentally changed as at October this year. Unlike beforehand, based on the 2019 policy, the recording will be done of the biological sex of every potential offender. Is that right?
Yes, on our systems, we have the system designed that allows us to be really clear in the data that we record.
Will there also be recording as well as of the biological sex of any potential offender? The recording of any declared, self-declared gender, if different from the biological sex. In other words, if a biological man says, I identify as a female, would that also be recorded, Deputy Chief Constable? We
will look to record that, and I think in our experience that there's been lots of conflation about sex and gender identity, and we want to be really clear. And I think the work that we've seen from the research from Professor Sullivan and the Supreme Court judgment brings real clarity about the accuracy of what we would want to record. But we've also articulated that it's incredibly important when somebody comes into custody that we treat them with the dignity and respect that they would look for. So the first critical point for us is how we record that biological sex. And yes, there may in the future be instances where their gender identity differs from their biological sex.
I appreciate the point about treating people with dignity. I appreciate it's a very sensitive topic, and I appreciate there are people with different views. But I just wanted to probe a wee bit further and take us through the consequences of this new policy, because if a biological man is recorded as a biological man but declares to be a woman, then how would that person be treated as the person goes through the criminal justice system? Would that person be treated as a man or as a woman when it comes to prosecution and sentence, assuming of course the prosecution leads to a guilty finding? So
I'll pick that up. Our priorities relate to supporting victims, prosecuting offenders, making sure that those people are brought to justice, and in recording accurately biological sex, we ensure that our crime data is accurate, and then we're able to use that information and data across policing and broader public policy. In terms of points around dignity and respect, the person would be recorded as a man, as a biological man. They would be recorded on the system as a man. In terms of the treatment of that person while in our care in custody, we would seek to engage with them in the identity that they want to be known. In terms of your further question through the justice system, I I don't think it's for me as the Chief Constable to make a commentary about how other agencies beyond policing will deal with these issues. What I would say is that in relation to the broader justice system and my colleagues south of the border, Police Scotland, in my view, is ahead in terms of the work that we've done, the reviews that we've undertaken and the decisions we've made in terms of how we've implemented the decisions around this Supreme Court judgment.
I mean, I appreciate, Chief Constable, that you're not responsible for decisions which are those for the Scottish Prison Service to make. And the Scottish Prison Service have a process in which they say is used in order to assess whether a biological male, self-identifying as a female, is housed in a male or a female prison, and if so, in what circumstances, for example, confinement and segregation from others, and so on. But I appreciate you're not responsible for that. But what I want to put to you is that, and this is a point the petitioners, I think, have made, is that they are looking to the Scottish Government for leadership and to your good self for leadership on this. And I just think what I'm driving at here is this, that if you record the biological sex of a potential offender, but treat that person as the gender which they wish to be treated, we'll just stick with the example of a biological male and self-identifying as a female. If you treat that person as a female, then does that not open a gateway whereby it kind of facilitates the Scottish Prison Service coming to the conclusion that it is safe for a biological male to be placed in female prisons? Are you not inadvertently and unwittingly perhaps facilitating that outcome by not clearly, not just recording, but treating a potential offender as the biological sex which they hold? And principally we're talking about males here. You see the point I'm making, that although it's not your decision where people are put in prison, male or female, if you actually treat a man as a woman, then it's no real surprise if that person ends up a man in a female prison. I'm not at all alluding to any court action going on here. I'm purely talking about the principle of the thing. So we're not getting into any sub judice prejudice territory. I just kind of wonder if, as Chief Constable, you feel that you need to go further in providing leadership that biological males should not, in fact, be housed in women's prisons.
So, that scenario has never happened in that 16,300 crimes since 2018. First point to make. That's not to say that it wouldn't happen. But we and I have made concrete progress and decisions based against the ruling and the decisions in relation to Supreme Court. And I have also considered our obligations in terms of human rights, dignity and respect. I've described our process, and I've described how people would be recorded. What the prison service then choose to do in relation to that, I can't be drawn on. I can't be drawn on. I'm responsible for this organisation, and I'm operating within the law, and we've made strong progress.
Would you agree with the general proposition and principle that biological males should not be imprisoned in women's prisons?
That's a policy position for the Scottish Prison Service.
Okay. Maurice Golden.
Thank you, Convener. Just so I'm clear, so in essence, on ground level, what's changed is that the biological sex will now be recorded, but essentially the treatment of the individuals exactly the same. Is that where we are currently?
So we will record the biological sex, both in relation to rape and sexual offences, and have been doing so since 2018, 16,000 plus crimes, and a decision that we took last month that we would expand that across all crimes.
And is that happening as we speak? Is that current?
The work that needs to follow the decision is having done a very detailed piece of work in relation to, you can imagine how many systems, digital systems we have across policing, and over the years the use of male, female, gender and sex has been conflated and confused. So we have worked through the detail of how those identifiers are described on the systems, and now we will progress with the work to ensure that they are compliant and that we are recording biological sex. And there is an additional element where somebody can tell us if they want to identify as a transgender identity.
Thank you. That's helpful clarity in terms of, because I was wondering why it was almost taking so long, but I appreciate in terms of IT and the different historic IT systems in Police Scotland why that might be the case. In terms of recording any identified gender, how is that delimited on the new system? Is it, literally just a trans person, or is there different ways in which they might identify?
So at the moment, our proposal is that biological male, biological female, and a trans identity. But to your point about there are 9, we've identified what we say 9 priority systems, and that's where we will start. Custody systems, our criminal justice case system, our intelligence system, our crime recording system.
Thank you.
David Russell.
Thank you, Chair. Bearing in mind there that this petition's been going on since 2021, you made a very clear, concise statement at the start. Are you happy with the length of time it's took for you to be in the position you're in just now? It seems a rather long time when it was a good statement that you actually made there at the beginning.
Well, I'll reinforce the point that I made around concrete steps. So I took over in this role, identified that we needed further clarity, always putting myself in the shoes of the people doing the job on the front line, and I've brought that clarity. And in addition to that, we've worked now in the areas in relation to the technology to ensure that's compliant, and other areas where where the Supreme Court judgment needs to then be reflected in the way in which we're going about other areas of a business.
Are there further areas that you will develop and progress as a result of the Supreme Court judgment, or are you almost there?
No, there are other areas that we've been working on. The Deputy will describe those to you.
Yeah, I think part of the challenge since 2019 at times is we've tried to operate with the availability of law and policy. And I think it's been incredibly helpful that we can now anchor our position on, the commentary of Professor Sullivan. We can look at the Supreme Court judgment. We can watch closely the Human Rights Commission and where they arrive at in terms of a code of practice. And I think we're reflective that if policy and law moves, then we would look to develop that. But in terms of data recording, that's one element. The safe spaces becomes another element. The position around stop search on the street and then search and custody is vitally important to us. And I think we've been very, very clear and unequivocal in the policy that we put in place and the guidance that we've given to officers and the level that we went to communicate clearly our position as it relates to stop and search. And then more recently, it's about facilities, safe spaces, single spaces within offices. So I think part of our challenge as a UK police force is, as Chief Constable has indicated, we're way ahead, I think, of other forces across the UK. We are very well connected in the National Police Chiefs Council, which is the forum for all UK policing, but I think in some of those spaces we've had to be bold and pave the way in some regards. So I think, you know, on reflection, you know, it's taking time, but we've got anchor points like the Supreme Court judgment, which has allowed us to push on with a degree of pace.
And one last thing, what's the feeling or feedback from your officers on the front line?
Firstly, the officers recognise it's a polarising context, and we face that operationally on a day-to-day basis in terms of how we police our business. The feedback and sense that I'm getting from officers is we have provided clarity. I think there is absolute clarity about data recording, expectations around stop and search, and I think that there's been instances where officers are not always sure-footed. They're not always confident, but if you were to look at our stop search policy and the guidance we've given to officers, I think it's crystal clear, and that's the feedback that we would get, and we would draw other feedback from officers as it filters into our staff surveys. So we have, in the last 2 years, reached a point where we'll survey our staff every year, so we listen to the feedback, and if I get a sense that we've got gaps or elements that need greater clarity, then we'll try and take that forward.
Thank you.
Fergus Ewing.
Thank you, Convener. Just pursuing the point that my colleague Davy Russell raised about the internal organisation of the police. I mean, I understand just from the website, I've got no detailed knowledge of this, that within the police there's a Scottish Women's Development Forum, there's a Scottish LGBTI Police Association, and that's fair enough. But I have been advised that within the police there is an organisation which represents those who describe themselves as the sex realist, called the Police Sex Equality and Equity Network, Police Scene UK, but attempts to have this recognised by Police Scotland have not been agreed. Is that correct? And I wonder if you can talk me through, because you know, I get the sense that the ethos of the police is to be as supportive as possible, recognise different views, not, if you like, get involved in some of the stuff we've seen in public bodies of disciplining people because they're deemed to hold unacceptable views, which has led to a tremendous outcry in the public, I think rightly so. So I guess I'm looking for some assurance that the Police Scotland is understanding of and sympathetic to and supportive of those officers who have particular views, including those who feel, as I do, as many others do, that biological males should not be housed in women's prisons, and take a sex realist point of view, whilst recognising, as the Deputy Chief said, the need to be sensitive and fair and to treat other people as you wish to be treated yourself.
I'll maybe start and answer your question, and the Chief Constable may want to add something to that. We've recognised the importance of engagement not only inside the organisation with stakeholders outside the organisation. We have a range of diversity staff associations across Police Scotland, and we've tried over the last couple of years particularly to try and draw those groups together. So we now have, chaired at executive level, a collaboration group which brings together all our diversity staff associations on a structured and regular basis, and that's separate to the day-to-day engagement that we would have with single diversity staff associations, as well as our statutory staff associations on a regular basis. There has been a little bit of correspondence over the last couple of years around the notion of a scene network. Our perspective at that time, and it hasn't, in my view, been pursued hugely in Scotland, but we see the capability of the Women's Development Forum as a platform to build on that. So I think first and foremost we're listening to our officers and our staff, and we're listening to the range of diversity staff associations. So I think there's a considerable piece of work being done in that regard. And in no way would we look to kind of muffle the voice of any of our organisation, but we do recognise that I think we've got an extensive range of associations and platforms in which views can be expressed.
And I'll add to that, and the Deputy talked there very briefly in relation to our staff survey. So our staff survey is one of the ways in which we obviously take feedback from across the organisation. I made a commitment that we would do that on an annual basis so that we were able to ensure that we're making positive progress across a number of areas of business. And the second survey will report to the Police Authority in the next few months. So there are a number of different avenues where our workforce of 22,000 people can provide views as to how they feel about the organisation and how they feel about the leadership of the organisation.
Just the last question. That will be communicated to staff after the final report. The final report being the final report following the September 24 review and the June 25 interim update, which I understand was provided. And when will that final report be made public?
In terms of the staff survey?
Yes.
So the staff survey will report into the Police Authority either at the end of this calendar year or early part of next year.
Okay, and the other report, which is in the general review, as I understand, so I'm told, when will that be published?
So our intention would be to take that to the public Police Authority Board in the early part of the year. I think what I would say, so that probably is around February. What I would say is that we've not, as an organisation, been silent for the last year and a half, and we've continually been feeding and communicating with our staff because we've put out 3 or 4 different pieces of guidance. We've made policy decisions. So I think inside the organisation, they're seeing the progress that we are making. But from the publication of that report, we intimated earlier that we'd do that in the early part of 2026.
To members of the public available in around February 26.
Yes, it'll be presented at the public element of the Police Authority Board, I would suspect.
Can I just
yes, of course.
add a further point? We have described some of this as interim, and I just wanted to ensure that the committee were clear. Interim because we are waiting on other bodies to report in this space. That is not interim in terms of, by any way, we are delaying.
Chief Constable?
So the Human Rights Commission are due to publish their code of practice. So I just wanted to clarify.
Is that the only one?
Clarify that point.
That's the only one you're
raising. And the code on stop and search.
Right, okay, exercising my discretion, Convener, I do expect now to be able to invite my 3 parliamentary colleagues to join it. Probably helpful for them to know that I'll start with Tess White, then Ruth Maguire, then Rachel Hamilton. Tess White.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning, Chief Constable and Deputy Chief Constable. I've got 4 questions and I'm conscious of time. So my first question, just to check, Chief Constable, one point that you said in your address to the committee. You said that no case there is no case of a male being recorded as a biological female. You said that remains the case. So as far as you're aware, in Police Scotland, there is not a single case of a man being recorded as a biological female on your record.
Since 2018.
Okay. What happens if you are informed that that is not the case on the ground? What's the process? Can the people come? Do they raise a whistleblowing? Can they come to you directly if it's happening in their force?
So the first thing we would do, one of the functions we have inside the organisation is crime registrars, and the role of a crime registrar is about the integrity and accuracy of our data recording. So, of course, if there was a sense that there was some element of inaccurate recording, then we would address that and we would look at that specifically.
So would you personally look at that if it is going on right now that you're not aware of, it is a practice, it's happened, they can come to you, directly to you? You're looking, Chief Constable, you're looking confused, so I'm just saying you're not aware, so I'll leave that with you. My second question...
So just
Yes.
to answer the question, so on broader issues, on all issues, some people will go through their first and second line manager. Some people will email directly into me. So if we're talking about a specific case... Yes,
they can directly email you.
People directly email.
Thank you very much. Right, my second question, Chief Constable, is Police Scotland previously said it had introduced this policy, the previous policy before today, in preparation for GRR reform, which, as we know, failed. So do you believe that was an appropriate position for the police service to take to preemptively align itself with the government rather than waiting for the bill to go through or not go through?
Well, you're asking me to comment on decisions made in that precede me. So I'd be commenting on behalf of others, and that's not the correct position for me to take.
So under your leadership, it didn't take place. You wouldn't preemptively say, oh, well, something's going on, so we'll do this, rather than wait until the law is clear.
So we would comply with the law and what the 2019 position, as I said earlier, in my view, at the point it said self-identification, people then there wasn't that clarity in terms of what to do in relation to those crimes of rape and sexual offences.
Okay. My third question is around the data that's been corrupted over the last few years. So what will you do to backtrack and make sure there's correct recording? Because basically the last few years the data has been corrupted. So what will happen?
So firstly, when it comes to crimes, as we've said a couple of times today, when it comes to crimes of rape and attempted rape, as it stands, we can find no inaccuracy in a recording of biological sex as it relates to those serious crimes. We will look very specifically at our data standards and our policies, and where appropriate, if there are any instances that needs adjusted, we will absolutely adjust them. Because I think there's one thing you can be assured that we're in agreement with is about the importance of accurate data recording, and Professor Sullivan addresses that in her research work, and we are really committed to ensure that within policing our data recording is accurate.
And if people come to you, Deputy Chief Constable Spears, and they come directly to you, can you guarantee that you will protect the source and that you will not go back and say what's going on? That you will, and you're looking, Chief Constable, but I want to protect the people now that will come to you and say, in my force, this is happening, please will you address it? So if you say yes, then it's good enough for me and this committee.
So I'm the gatekeeper of the professionalism portfolio. Values are really important to us as an organisation. So set against our values about integrity, fairness and respect, you can be absolutely assured that we would have the best interests of anyone who came and spoke to us.
Thank you. And then my final question relates to a question that my colleague Mr Ewing said in relation to police scene, and I do have their badge on today, and I said to my constituents I would wear it for them. There are a number of police officers, serving police officers, who do feel uncomfortable with the topic that we're discussing today. I mean, everybody's wellbeing and inclusion is important. I met the head of HR in one of our Equalities Committee, and I got pushback about police scene. And it seems that the police support the groups that support self-ID, but don't support the staff networks that support biological reality. I'd just like to say that I'm a fellow of the Institute of Personnel and have been for 30 plus years. This does matter. Staff networks do matter. So will you meet with police scene and talk to them and get their feedback directly, either Chief Constable, you, if you could do it, or Deputy Chief Constable Spears? Will you meet with police scene in the next few months to get their feedback?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that's really important to us. I said earlier that had been a little bit of correspondence some times ago, but I would like to think as senior leaders in policing we do listen. So I'm happy, and we will be content to engage with officers or staff within the organisation and look how best we can take that forward.
Because your head of HR has a different view, so if I could leave that with you, I'd be grateful. Thank you, Convener.
Thank you. Ruth Maguire.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I have some questions around communication. I think, firstly, I welcome the clarity of your statement this morning and the acknowledgement that there were mixed messages previously coming out of Police Scotland. In terms of communication to officers, many of whom, of course, will be impacted by crime as well as policing crime, can you give some more detail on when the change in policy was communicated, how that was formed and the date that happened, please?
Yeah, so you're talking about the decision go back to September 24, because we've made a number of policy decisions. Is that the one you're reflecting on?
I suppose, yes, the main one, although it might be helpful for committee to hear if there was different ways that that's communicated out, then the different pieces of policy that have changed. But... So
if we go back to the position that the Chief Constable took at the Police Authority Board in September 26, that was a decision that was made by the Executive in advance of that board. We've then got a number of arrangements in place. So how do we communicate that? So as an organisation, we still would use memos, but we recognise that in a large organisation spanning a third of the UK, we have to be much more engaging. So we would host shift briefings. We would do extended leaders forums. So there are a range of ways, and we've got an intranet which every employee within the organisation is accessible to. So that's one way, or it's a number of ways in which we can communicate clearly, and then we're drawn on feedback from there. These would be the vehicles that we would use routinely for any policy or any communication across the organisation. And within our corporate communication structure, there's now an entire team that are dedicated to the internal communications across the organisation.
Okay, and in terms of feedback, you spoke about an annual staff survey. Mm-hmm. So what questions in the next staff survey will be there to ensure that the officers are comfortable with, understand the clear policy that you've laid out this morning?
So the survey has a number of elements to it, a number of themes. And one of the themes is in terms of, do people understand the purpose? Do they have the right direction? There won't be a specific question on this point because in order to use the survey to demonstrate progress, we need to ask the same questions on each occasion so that we can test ourselves and measure ourselves. But it's questions around, do you know the direction of the organisation? Do you understand what your objectives are? Do you have the right equipment? And there's a whole range of questions. There won't be a specific question on the specific point that we're discussing this morning.
I'd appreciate that in terms of a sort of meaningful data from a survey. So how will you know that the officers are clear following the mixed messages that have,
well,
been?
I come back to the 16,000+ records of biological men committing rape as the first point. The deputy described there now having looked across all of the data systems and the work that we need to do in respect of being really, really clear about biological sex and not interchanging those words with gender. We will have to do a further strong piece of communication so that people understand within the organisation the importance of this. But what we did discuss actually a couple of days ago, technology has moved on now, and everybody will be familiar with you know, the point at which you put an entry onto a digital system, and it can have built into it, you know, that check and balance. So we will use the technology to as much as we can to ensure that we can be reassured around the accuracy.
Thank you. Thank you, Convener.
And finally, Rachel Hamilton.
Thank you, Convener. Good morning. I've just got a question I just want some clarity on. Why initially did it take so long after the Chief Constable's initial statement in 2024 for a policy or a directive to be initiated and the policy to be implemented? Why did we have this great long gap between then and now?
I don't think there's been a long gap. There was a clarity. I brought clarity in September of last year, and then very shortly after that we began the work in relation to ensuring that our systems were accurate and compliant. And then we've used publication, Professor Sullivan's report, and obviously the decision by the Supreme to inform us further.
Okay, so what happens next? Because we're talking about the review and talking about further evidence or further advice being gathered. Did you say the Human Rights Commission? Is that what you said earlier to an answer?
So the Equality and Human Rights Commission, at some point are going to issue their code.
And are those, is that organisation part of what you described earlier as the oversight group?
No, they would be one of the bodies that we would take into account their position in the same way as we have taken into account the legislation.
Okay, so but you've mentioned a number of times that Police Scotland have taken into account the report from Professor Alice Sullivan plus the Supreme Court decision. Is that not enough? Why do you have to wait for further bodies to give you advice?
We're not waiting. We're progressing the work, but to the point, knowing that we're waiting on two codes of practice, one in relation to stop and search and one in more broadly, we've decided to use the term interim, and at the point at which we get those, we can finalise it. But in no way is it stopping the development of the work, the progress in terms of compliance with the legislation.
So we can be confident, and the public can be confident, despite the sort of delay that we've seen in terms of the implementation since 2024, since that original statement. We can be confident that this is happening right across the board right now.
Yeah, I differ with you in terms of delay. I'll repeat that as a public body in Scotland and as a police service across the United Kingdom, we have made rapid and concrete strides to ensure that we are legally compliant, and we've taken the right action to ensure that people are confident not only in the way in which we treat people, but that we are recording data accurately to make good policy decisions moving forward.
Okay, and can I be clear that the guidance that was talked about earlier, is that related to the two codes of conduct that will be produced or published? What is the guidance, and is it subject to scrutiny? Is it subject to scrutiny by the oversight group, and if so, who belongs to the oversight group?
So there's a number of pieces of guidance that we've issued and some policy decisions we're making. I'm unclear specifically as to which one you would be pointing to, but if I take the illustration of stop search, so the guidance that Police Scotland in recent years have operated under is Scottish Government guidance as it relates to stop and search in the street. Our position is with all that's developed through the Supreme Court, for example, we have made a policy decision and issued internal guidance to our officers around stop and search, We need the government's guidance that sits over the top of that to catch up with that, but we felt it was the right and proper thing to do, that we drive forward with guidance as it relates to stop and search, because it's an operational imperative, and it's an imperative when individuals come into custody. So that would be one illustration of, I think we're bold in that space, in terms of just pushing on, doing what we believe to be the right thing in circumstances like that. We again have taken a similar approach just to our estate and the use of our facilities and the approaches that we would want to take. And I think we're consistent in terms of the use of the estate, how we would adopt stop search, and how we would record in the circumstances we've discussed this morning.
This together in a final question.
Thank you. So, can I just ask, on the crime history system that was being used as the software to record data, will Police Scotland look retrospectively at all the data that was collected prior to, I think one of you said 2018, to ensure that all victims of rape and crime feel safe?
Yeah, so we've indicated we've got a number of systems, and I think we've been really clear to the committee this morning that we have looked at, when we have data recording and weeding standards, and there are a number of different systems that are impacted. This, so first and foremost for us, it's the crime system, it's then the custody system, it's the criminal history system, and I think we've been really clear this morning with the committee about our confidence in accurate data recording as it relates to rape and attempted rape. But you can be assured that, given that we have intimated how important the accuracy of data recording is, if there is any sense that there are systems that we need to retrospectively revisit, then we will absolutely do that.
Chief Constable, Deputy Chief Constable, is there anything further you would want to add that you feel you've not had an opportunity to say in the evidence that we've been able to consider?
No, thank you.
In which case, I'd like to thank you both very much for your attendance this morning. Members, are we content to, of the committee that is, members of the committee, are we content to consider the evidence we've heard this morning later in our meeting, and at a later date we are? In which case, can I thank the witnesses very much for your attendance here this morning, colleagues who have joined us, and I'll suspend the committee for a few moments. Thank you. Welcome back. I would highlight to those who are joining us this morning or watching online, and as I said some moments ago before we heard evidence in relation to the previous petition, Parliament, of course, will dissolve in April next year. The final sitting will be in March. And we still have a huge number of open petitions before the committee. And our focus, therefore, now is on trying to identify the areas where we feel we can make progress in the time remaining. And any judgments we come to about whether or not we feel we can keep a petition open are not a reflection on the importance of the subject, but as a reflection on the ability of the committee to make progress in the limited time remaining. To facilitate the diary of colleagues, I intend to upset the order of the continued petitions in order that we move to petition number 2085 first, which is to introduce a statutory definition of residency for fatal accident inquiries into the deaths of Scots abroad. The petition, I understand, is with us in the gallery, and that is David Cornock, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce a statutory definition of fatal accident inquiries into deaths abroad. And we last considered this petition on the 2nd of April, and we agreed to write to the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs. We've been joined by our MSP's colleagues Michael Mara and Tess White. Michael Mara has spoken in relation to this petition before us on a number of occasions, so good morning to you and good morning again to Tess White. I've got quite a bit to say, just as it happens this morning in relation to the petition, so I hope colleagues will bear with me. The committee is aware that the system of coroner's inquests, which is used in England and Wales, is significantly different to the Scottish system of death investigations. Coroner inquests mainly determine how, where and when someone died, but they rarely make wider recommendations in relation to the circumstances of the death. In Scotland, fatal accident inquiries aim to establish what happened and to prevent future deaths from happening in similar circumstances. And in addition to determining whether someone was ordinarily resident, the Lord Advocate must consider that 1. The death was sudden, suspicious, unexplained, or gives rise to serious public concern. 2. The circumstances of the death have not been sufficiently established in the course of other investigations, e.g. by the country in which the death occurred. Thirdly, whether there is a real prospect that a fatal accident inquiry could sufficiently establish the circumstances of the death, e.g. would evidence about the circumstances of the death be available? And finally, if it is in the public interest to hold a fatal accident inquiry. Now, there were 43 fatal accident inquiries carried out in Scotland between April 22 and March 23. And the Cabinet Secretary's response states that inquiries into deaths abroad were always anticipated to be rare under the legislation. The submission states that an investigation into a death abroad faces formidable hurdles without the cooperation of the domestic authorities, as neither Police Scotland nor the Lord Advocate have jurisdiction to conduct investigations overseas. And the Cabinet Secretary points out that these challenges are also faced in England and Wales. And in this matter, the Cabinet Secretary has stated that there is no intention to change the current system in Scotland. On the substantive matter defining the term ordinarily resident, the Law Society of Scotland, the Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service and the Scottish Government have all previously advised that they consider the definition of ordinarily resident in common law to be widely recognised and accepted. And the leading case in this matter put the question, and I quote, "Has the applicant shown that he has habitually and normally resided in the United Kingdom from choice and for a settled purpose throughout the prescribed period, apart from temporary or occasional absences?" The Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs reiterated in her most recent written submission that the term ordinarily resident contained within the legislation is viewed as sufficiently flexible and workable by the Crown Office and the Procurator Fiscal Service, and it is sufficient to allow the Lord Advocate to conduct an assessment into ordinary residence depending on the facts and circumstances of each particular case. The petitioner has provided 2 written submissions to the committee, and he states that with an estimated 1,000 deaths of Scots overseas since the bill was passed in 2016, He does not believe that anyone can justify the effectiveness of the current system and reiterates his view that the current process does not work and that the ordinarily resident test is not applied correctly. The second submission highlights a recent roundtable meeting attended by a number of representatives, including members of Parliament, MSPs, Police Scotland, Victim Support and the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office. And the submission includes a contribution from the Director of Instrumentation and Control at Chart Industries, who highlights that employees can undertake assignments for a number of years. He states that given the length of these postings, it is essential to have a clear and practical definition of ordinarily resident. Similarly, a written submission from Graham Duncan notes that he is unclear as to whether his colleagues working abroad in the oil and gas industry for months at a time would be considered ordinarily resident. Another individual, Julie Love, has provided a written submission in support of the petition, as she had a similar petition considered back in 2009. She shares her view that there doesn't appear to be a safeguard for families with loved ones abroad. Finally, Dave Duggan MP has provided a written submission, and I understand he has been supporting the petitioner and his campaigning work. Dave Duggan MP believes that there is an efficacy gap between the Act as introduced and the impact on bereaved families who have lost loved ones abroad. So, before I invite suggestions from colleagues, I will, of course, invite our parliamentary colleagues who have joined us to add anything that they would wish the committee to consider in addition. Michael Mara.
Thank you, Convener. Can I start by giving my thanks to the committee for their continued interest in this, particularly given the workload that the Convener has outlined. You covered a lot of ground in your lengthy introduction, Convener, and some of the things I was going to say already in giving account of the progress that has been made, or lack of progress in reality, I think, since we last met and considered the petition back in April. We did have the round table here in Parliament. I think and what was the most clear outcome of that was the emerging cross-party consensus that this law is not working, as represented in the letter that was, we copied to you as convener and to your committee members, that this law simply isn't working. I note the response from the Cabinet Secretary to the committee, and I think the words were exceptionally rare, or regarding these kind of inquiries, but they have been non-existent, convener. Absolutely non-existent since the legislation has passed, not a single one. And I think it would test the credibility of that definition to say that of the approximately 1,000 deaths of Scots abroad, that none of them would be able to meet that test. I also recognise in the description the difference between the two systems, between England and Wales and in Scotland. There are clear differences in the system, both in terms of process and also intent in parts. But we have to really be clear that through that I think that where they're not directly comparable, we can draw some instances where people have received some level of clarity around the circumstances that where their loved ones have passed away abroad, and also some level of closure for their families as well. That's not been available to Scots who face these circumstances. I also think there's some level of contradiction between what the Cabinet Secretary has written to you in this committee in her letter. And on the 10th of October, the First Minister signalled a willingness to look again at the legislation. He told a journalist, and I quote, "I understand entirely the concerns that he, Mr Cormack, has and would want to see those addressed." That was in the aftermath of the round table and the emerging cross-party consensus that was there. So I think there's a weight of growing evidence and concern that this law has not worked. I also wanted to highlight another issue that wasn't covered in your own area, and it would not be. It was a communication from Hamish Faulkner MP, who's the Minister for the Middle East and North Africa, Afghanistan and Pakistan, and it was dated the 30th of October, written to Dave Duggan MP, and that clearly stated that the FCDO in UK can intervene in a suspicious death abroad should concerns be raised on the pace, quality or progress of any investigation in that jurisdiction. If the family have serious concerns that their loved one died suspiciously, they should raise that with the local UK police, who can contact the foreign component through policing channels. So on more than 2 occasions, taking that advice from the Foreign and Commonwealth Development Office, the Cornocks spoke to and were interviewed by Police Scotland, who produced a major incident report stating they were very suspicious regarding younger David's death, and the quality of the investigation. On both occasions, those processes were closed down by superiors within Police Scotland. I don't think this system is working, Convener. It's not working on the basis of process, and it's not working on the basis of the law. So in closing, I have 3, if I can, very short requests that the committee might consider. The first would be that they might write to the Cabinet Secretary again in light of that cross-party letter and ask her for a more considered response, particularly given the words from the First Minister, which I put on the record today. And the committee, given that the last section I mentioned about the police, the committee might possibly consider lending their weight to helping myself and my constituent secure a meeting with the Chief Constable. Given your process this morning, you clearly have better success than that than we do. So it would be useful if you were perhaps able to write in that regard. I also recognise that in recent weeks that you have had Cabinet Secretaries in to talk to them about a variety of petitions. I would maybe ask, when you're considering your work programme, whether the Justice Secretary is going to be in front of you at some point, whether we might be able to put some questions regarding this issue to the Cabinet Secretary. If she's not, I'm sure the Cabinet Secretary would agree that it was a good use of her time to actually answer some questions on this issue, given the growing cross-party consensus. Can I close by saying that I greatly appreciate your forbearance. I appreciate the workload. I do think this is an incredibly serious issue that affects many, many families across Scotland, and the committee is doing sterling work in trying to support my constituent in that regard. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mara. Testimony.
I'd just like to say one brief thing to support my colleague, Mr. Mara, which if there's a discrepancy, particularly for this one, between England and Scotland, then it does need to be addressed. So I'd fully support what Michael Mara has said. Thank you.
Thank you. Fergus,
Sorry, you were going to opine.
Was I?
I don't know.
I wondered if you had any thoughts you wanted to contribute.
Well, I did start off somewhat sceptical, but listening to what Mr. Mara said and just refreshing my memory as to what has been said, I mean, it is apparent to me that from the outset it has been made clear by the petitioner and from the evidence that in England there have been between 200 and 400 investigations into deaths abroad. In Scotland there's been 0. And I looked again at the Cabinet Secretary's submission of the 26th of May to see if there was any explanation for this. And the only explanation is essentially that it's very difficult to do, that you don't have jurisdiction. Well, that's the case for England and Wales as well. So it doesn't really explain. Now, the petitioner wants a statutory definition, and that may be one solution. The Law Society says it's not necessary. But I wonder if the wider problem is that the authorities in Scotland are simply averse to doing this altogether because they think that there are practical reasons, and there are practical reasons. We recognise that. So I do actually feel that for the people for whom this matters greatly. For someone who loses a loved one abroad in circumstances which are unexplained, this will linger forever. So it is a serious matter precisely because the Cabinet Secretary hasn't really answered the points raised. I do think that we should certainly go back to the Cabinet Secretary. I mean, it's a bit like, you know, being asked to do an exam paper and saying, well, I don't really agree with any of the questions, but will you give me a pass mark? You know, it's not on, really. And we're here again and again and again in this situation, Mr. Mara, with Cabinet Secretaries that, for some reason, unlike Ms Minter this morning, who was excellent, I thought, in her responses, so it's not blanket criticism, although it's not rare for me to criticise the current government. But I do think on this occasion, the lack of a basic answer is an insult to the petitioners and to this committee, actually. So I certainly really don't think it should be closed. I'm sorry if that is not the view that others may have, but I'm not quite sure if we go so far as taking evidence, because I think we just need some clarity. Just the last point to make is, as well as the Chief Constable, I think if we're going to make an approach, it should be to the Lord Advocate, because I think the Lord Advocate has, if I'm correct, has the final say in these matters. I could be wrong about that. And I had a meeting with the Lord Advocate about the inadequacies of the FII system in Scotland, and I thought she was actually very aware, attuned and involved in trying to improve the process here. So I would certainly want to involve the Lord Advocate as well as the Chief Constable if the committee agrees with that approach.
And I think, bearing in mind the
Mr. Russell.
numbers, I think bearing in mind the significant numbers involved, 1,000 deaths is a lot of deaths, affecting families, so that's multiplied for the people it's affecting. I think we should be maybe digging a wee bit deeper here.
Okay. I think that, we are faced with the fact that the Law Society of Scotland, the Crown Office, the Procurator Fiscal Service all want to do nothing further, I better say, and the Cabinet Secretary for Justice and Home Affairs has made it perfectly clear that the Scottish Government does not intend to do anything further. And at the same time, I think the committee is of the view that the issues raised are more important than that dusty response that we've received. Can I suggest, therefore, that since the responses we've received have been after the roundtable discussion that took place, where there does appear to be a wider cross-party support and understanding of the failure of the issue, that we do write to the Cabinet Secretary saying that we would like her to consider further the issue, given that there is considerable disquiet and for the reasons Mr Mara has articulated, but also pointing out, as Mr Ewing has said, it seems extraordinary that there have been no inquiries in Scotland when, irrespective of the system being different in England and Wales, they have been able to progress inquiries in the face of exactly the same challenges that any inquiry in Scotland, led by Scotland, would face as well. And I'm perfectly content for the committee to also write to the Chief Constable to say that we think this is an issue that it would be helpful for them to, for the Police Scotland, with which it would be helpful for Police Scotland to engage. Just, my mother will correct me in my grammar if I get that the wrong way around. And would it be that they would be prepared to meet with Mr Mara and the petitioner with a view to trying to progress these issues? Are there any other suggestions from the committee, or are they content with that course of it? And the Lord Advocate, yes. Are we content to keep the petition open on that basis, notwithstanding the wall of negativity we've received from officialdom, but with a view to trying to penetrate that further with our further efforts? Are we content to do that? We are. Thank you, Mr. members. That brings us to petition number 2028 to extend the concessionary bus travel scheme to include people seeking asylum in Scotland. This has been a long-standing petition. I remember it first lodged by Pina Akku on behalf of the Maryhill Integration Network and Doha. Unfortunate, so I do apologise. An unfortunate slip of the tongue there. The Maryhill Integration Network and Doha Ab-Umar on behalf of the Voices Network. And the petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to extend the current concessionary travel scheme to all people seeking asylum in Scotland, regardless of age. And we've been joined, as we have been previously, by our colleague and former member of the committee, Paul Sweeney. Good morning to you, Mr Sweeney. We last considered this back in March when we agreed to write to the Scottish Government. We received a response from Transport Scotland. It states that the working group responsible for designing a pilot scheme to progress free bus travel for all asylum seekers has reconvened this year, and it was due to have its first meeting in May. It also indicates that officials are considering and would discuss with the working group whether it is possible to include people seeking asylum in the statutory national concessionary travel schemes in the longer term. In August, in a response to a written question, the Minister of Agriculture and Connectivity anticipated that the pilot scheme would begin this autumn. However, in an additional submission, the petitioners indicate that they are still waiting for this pilot to begin and continue to urge the Scottish Government to commit to a sustainable and long-term solution to this issue. And I recall that we raised this issue directly with the First Minister, as was Hamza Yousaf, an earlier stage. It was agreed. There was then a disruption to all of that. We were then told that the aims of the petition were once again being pursued. And so, it does seem that this goes on a little bit longer than we're told the will is supposedly there to make it happen. But before the committee consider what further they might do, I'll invite Mr Sweeney to comment.
Thank you, Convener and colleagues. And as you know, this petition has been part of a long-running campaign that began in December 2021 around the extension of free concessionary travel to people seeking asylum, because they are often the most destitute members of a community with an income of less than £50 per week. So the rationale for extension of the existing concessionary travel schemes to this relatively small group of the population made sense. The government accepted the rationale for it, but we have been caught in the teeth, as you've said, Convener, on the logistics of how to best implement it. The preferred solution is a straightforward extension of eligibility under the existing concessionary travel schemes. The government had intimated it was piloting a project. The pilot, I believe, in Aberdeen was very successful, but that was based on a sort of ad hoc issuing of bus passes through charitable organisations, which isn't really a systemic approach, which would be ideal. So government...
Because I have a recollection that the Cabinet Secretary at the time was concerned that the extension of the scheme in the way that you've identified might have had a knock-on effect in the way that the Home Office subsequently considered what the level of support that asylum seekers were then receiving, and that it could actually prove to have been counterproductive if it was implemented in that way.
Yeah, the risk identified by the government at the time was that no recourse to public funds rules, which have an explicit list of prohibited benefits, could be added to and include this scheme if it were introduced, which comes across a bit of a bad faith and vindictive thing to do. I don't think realistically, politically, that's a real risk, certainly now with the changing government. So I think if I may, but I think it's worth exploring this again. And the government has previously said it would do it. It rescinded that commitment. It's now reinstated that commitment, but we're still stuck on this issue of when is it going to be implemented through statutory instrument. And I think it would be helpful if the committee could press the government further on its timetable for the statutory instrument. There's no real rationale for further delay and hindrance here. Let's just get on with it. I just want to pay tribute to Melia Integration Network and Red Cross Voices Network for the persistence in this regard. Doa and Pinar have been excellent advocates on behalf of their membership, and the need for it is well established, certainly from a health perspective as much as anything else. So I hope we can get on with it without further delay, and I think there's a political will to do so.
Well, that commitment on behalf of the UK government is something I hope doesn't prove to be a cross that you have to bear and subsequently repent in relation to. So. But notwithstanding that, I mean, I think this is a petition we've engaged with for some time. We raised it with the First Minister. Our colleagues content that we ask the Minister for Agriculture and Connectivity for a progress update on the pilot scheme that was due to commence this autumn, and actually try to see what efforts we can make to actually direct the thing and move it forward. And actually just say that we really hope that this is all going to materialise in the lifetime of this Parliament, given the duration of the petition and also the acceptance there has been at various stages from government of the aims that it seeks to secure. Are colleagues content with that? We are. Well, that's what we'll do. Thank you, Mr Sweeney. Petition number 2074, to increase local government funding to help protect the vulnerable elderly population and prevent the closure of care homes. This has been lodged by Ioana Stoddart. It calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to increase the funding it provides to local councils, enabling them to deliver the best possible health and social care and help to protect the vulnerable, frail and elderly population from the closure of residential and nursing care homes. We last considered this in March. We agreed then to write to COSLA and the Cabinet Secretary for Finance and Local Government. The response from COSLA highlights increasing pressure on the sector and significant funding constraints in local government, which have made negotiations with the sector regarding the average cost of care particularly challenging. COSLA reiterates that it is the responsibility of individual local authorities to manage their own budgets and to allocate the total financial resources available to them, including for health and social care services, on the basis of local needs and priorities. COSLA intends to continue to press the Scottish Government on the importance of urgent additional funding so that local authorities can invest in social care and social work services. Now, in his response, the Minister for Social Care and Mental Wellbeing states that the 25-26 budget allocation to local government in Scotland saw one of the largest increases in funding in recent times, with a real terms increase of 5.5%. In relation to the impact of fiscal pressures, the Minister indicates that the Government has been engaging with COSLA leaders, the Integrated Joint Board Chief Financial Officers and COSLA to gain a better understanding of the ranges of the issues and consider how the pressure on social care can be managed. Additionally, the Minister points to the Financial Viability Response Group, which has developed a detailed risk register and have identified potential mitigating actions for the sector. Do comments of any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Mr Torrens.
Thank you, Convener. I wonder, in light of evidence that the committee has, if we would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standard Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has indicated that a 5.5% real terms increase in funding has been provided to local authorities in the 2025-26 budget. The Scottish Government policy is to allow local authorities the financial freedom to operate independently and to target investment according to their assessments of local needs. And the Scottish Government is undertaking a programme of work to understand fiscal pressures and financial viability in the social care sector.
Are colleagues content that we draw this petition to a close on that basis?
Perhaps might disassociate with the rationale behind that, but certainly I think we should close the petition.
Noted. Petition number 2087 to pass a law making exercising a dog in a cemetery an offence. This continued petition is lodged by Paul Irvine, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to pass a law making exercising a dog in a cemetery an offence punishable by an on-the-spot fine for infringement. And we last considered this on the 19th of March, and we agreed to write to local authorities in Scotland. The committee received responses from 13 local authorities, 11 of which have cemetery management rules in place for dogs. The rules in place either exclude non-assistance dogs, require them to be on a leash or kept under control. A number of local authorities noted that signage is in place to explain the rules, and in some cases additional signage has been placed in cemeteries where dog activity has proved to be a concern. However, the number of complaints was provided, the instances were low. However, other responses did note that non-compliance with the cemetery rules does take place and that enforcement can be challenging. So, notwithstanding that, I don't know, do members have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Mr Ewing.
Well, I'm grateful to the petitioner for raising this. It was an interesting topic, and one can certainly understand the strength of feeling that the petitioner had. I think we have looked into it in a fairly thorough fashion, and in the light of the fact that we are moving towards the fag end of this session of Parliament, and therefore having scope of doing much more than we've done to close the petition under Rule 15.7 of the Standing Orders, for 4 reasons: that councils have the power to make management rules under the Civic Government Scotland Act, that 11 out of 13 local authorities have cemetery management rules in place to either exclude non-assistance dogs from cemeteries, require them to be kept on a leash or kept under close control, that a number of local authorities raised challenges faced in enforcing existing cemetery management rules and stated that a new law would need money to fund enforcement, which is a practical reality, I guess. And the Control of Dogs Scotland Act 210 and the Dog Fouling Scotland Act 203 require dogs to be under control and provides that where a dog does its business in a public space, the person responsible must clear it up. So, in the light of all these arguments, and with thanks to the petitioner, I would propose that we close this particular petition.
Thank you, Mr Ewing. On the basis of Mr Ewing's recommendation, colleagues have any comments, of course? Any suggestions?
No, I fully agree with Mr Ewing. I just wonder if it's a bit unfortunate that, as far as I can make out, the petitioner's local authority didn't respond, which is unfortunate. So perhaps that's a matter that the petitioner could take up with local councillors.
His own MSP,
Yes.
potentially as well, because yes, that does seem a little discourteous. Are we content to close the petition, however, otherwise? Thank you. The last of our open petitions this morning is a petition number 2133, on which you'll have received some late submissions to expand ScotRail's inter-7 city routes to include Dunfermline, lodged by Andrew Wedge, and it calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to ensure every city in Scotland has a direct express rail connection to each other by expanding ScotRail's inter-7 city routes to include Scotland's newest city, Dunfermline, again last considered on the 19th of March. We wanted then to find out whether the proposal to reopen the Alloa to Dunfermline line for passenger services would be reviewed in light of the significant housing development in the West Fife area. And we also asked what consideration had been given to using existing connections to provide rail services linking Dunfermline with Glasgow and Stirling without the need to go to Edinburgh. And the response from Transport Scotland indicates that there remains a path for regional or local rail projects to come forward, subject to a strong business case and suitable funding. If sufficient future travel demand from West Fife is identified, Transport Scotland would consider this within the appropriately developed business case. But on the second point, the response explains that the railway in Fife is not yet electrified, so any direct services between Fife and Glasgow would need to run diesel trains on a mostly electrified route. This would have a negative impact on speeds and reliability. However, Transport Scotland suggests that the question of a direct service could be revisited once the partial electrification of the Fife route is more advanced. Members may recall that the Scottish Government's position on the ask of the petition is that it is reasonable, stating that it was given detailed consideration in recent years and that rail connectivity in Fife will be kept under review as travel patterns evolve. Do we have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? David Torrance.
In light of evidence that the committee has received, I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standard Orders on the basis that proposals relevant to a petition were previously considered by ScotRail, Network Rail and Transport Scotland, and they could be revisited if sufficient future travel demands is identified or when the relevant sections of the rail infrastructure are particularly electrified, and that the Scottish Government is keeping options for development of rail connectivity in Fife under review.
Thank you. Do we have any other alternative suggestions, or are members content to proceed on the basis of Mr Torrance's recommendation? We are. Thank you. That brings us to agenda item 4, the consideration of new petitions. And as always, before considering a new petition, I make the point that following today's proceedings, we have a considerable amount of work in advance of us with petitions that we already are considering. But notwithstanding that, petitions first consideration, we always seek an additional view from the Government and also from the Parliament's independent research body SPICE, as that gives us the ability to properly consider the issues that are raised by the petition, when previously we simply used to meet and then suggest that those two things happen. However, we are committed now to seeking to look to where we feel we can make progress on behalf of a petition. The first of those new petitions is petition number 2178 to introduce mandatory latex labelling for food products sold in Scotland. I gather that the petitioner may be with us in the gallery. I mean, forgive me, my eyesight is such that there is a blur at the back of the gallery, but I see a hand moving. So welcome to Holyrood. And this has been lodged by Hazel Margaret McKeever. The petition, is it McKeever or McIver? McIver. The petition is said a silent voice from the gallery. The petition is calling on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce mandatory latex labelling on food products sold in Scotland if there is a chance of contamination. Now, there is a requirement for regulated food contact materials to be authorised before use in Great Britain. The requirements include that any material or article intended to come into contact directly or indirectly with food must be sufficiently inert to preclude substances from being transferred to food in quantities large enough to endanger human health. Currently, food manufacturers are not legally required to set out if latex is used either in packaging and food production, and this is because latex is not a food substance or product and is therefore not included in the list of mandatory allergens that must be labelled under the Assimilated Food Information to Consumers Regulation. The SPICE briefing states that it is unclear to what extent latex is used in food packaging. Food Standards Scotland advised SPICE that the typical cold seal adhesive is derived from natural rubber latex, The adhesive is used to seal the edges of packaging for a wide variety of applications, such as packing chocolate bars. Food Standards Scotland understands that the potential for the adhesives to migrate into the food is very low. The Scottish Government's response to the petition states that to engage food safety provisions, the issue would need to have an effect on the food which was detrimental to consumer interests. And the response does recognise that the petition raises a broader question about food packaging and states that officials plan to explore other consumer protection measures. Do we have any suggestions as to how we might proceed in the light of that final point? Mr Torrens.
Convener, in light of the final point, I wonder if the committee would consider writing to the Scottish Government to ask whether exploration of consumer protection measures will consider how to alert consumers of allergens such as latex that can be present in food packaging, and if it will work with the UK Government when considering options for packaging-based consumer protection measures.
Yes, well, I think those two questions volunteer themselves, given that there is an interest in officials investigating these matters. So I think there is progress we could make in this petition that Parliament is left to us. Mr Ewing.
Yes, I would support Mr Torrance's recommendation and just add that, as the petitioner points out, that the number of people, including my partners, that happens who have latex allergies is not inconsiderable. It's 1 to 6% of the population, and when the allergy exists, like many allergies, it can have very serious consequences. So I'm surprised in a sense that this hasn't been dealt with in the packaging world, because normally they're fairly good at dealing with these kind of things. So maybe it's something that really does need to be dealt with. I just thought if we could stress that in the letter, that's
a perfectly reasonable thing for us to do. So we will illustrate why the issue is important, again, within the context of the review that might be going to take place. Our colleagues consent that we keep the petition open and that we proceed with the investigation on that basis. We are. Thank you. Petition number 2181 to remove teachers' ability to backdate and alter school records. This has been lodged by Paul Blaker on behalf of Accountability Scotland. The petition has called on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to introduce measures to stop teachers from backdating or altering school records in CMIS and other education management information systems. CMIS is the management information system provider used by local authority schools in Scotland, and it holds the core student records. The petitioner believes that the practice of altering school records after they were created is open to abuse and could cause significant harm to children. Spice Briefing cites the particular case mentioned by the petitioner in which a local council in Scotland was censured by the Information Commissioner's Office for backdating education records, and adds that in a separate case a different council was found by the SPSO not to have consistently recorded incidents reported in pastoral and other recording systems. In its response, the petition the Scottish Government makes clear its expectation for local authorities and schools to keep accurate and timely records in compliance with relevant legislation and with any government guidance. The Scottish Government also expects local authorities to ensure that staff and teachers understand how information should be recorded and to have clear audit processes and procedures in place to track who has accessed such systems, what changes were made to pre-existing information and the reason for those changes. CMIS explained to our SPICE researchers that the ability to backdate or update service records, in pastoral notes is intended to align with the day-to-day practice in schools. Teachers or staff may not be able to update records immediately and may create or update records when they have non-contact time. CMIS also clarifies that following the issues highlighted in the first case mentioned above, changes were made in the system to allow local authorities to access a record of the content history of an entry, rather than just the dates and the authors of any changes. Colleagues, do we have any suggestions as to how we might proceed? Mr Torrens.
Thank you, Convener. I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government has indicated it is the responsibility of local authorities and schools to keep accurate records in compliance with relevant legislation and guidance, to have a clear audit process in place and to work with their school management information system provider to ensure that systems are fit for purpose. The ability to update records in CMIS is intended to align with the day-to-day practice in schools and to allow staff to update records when they have a non-contact time. And changes to CMIS systems mean that local authorities can now also access the content history of individuals' notes rather than just date and author and information.
Thank you, Mr Torrance. Are members content? Yes, so we thank the petitioner for raising the petition. Unfortunately, I don't think there's more that we could reasonably hope to achieve in the very limited time left to us, and for the reasons Mr Torrance has suggested, we have closed the petition, but we thank you for the submission. The last of these new petitions today is petition 2182 to review the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act and to introduce a minimum sentence for severe offences. This has been lodged by Hannah Doig. The petition calls on the Scottish Parliament to urge the Scottish Government to review the definition of domestic abuse in the Domestic Abuse Scotland Act and to introduce a minimum sentence for severe offences. The petitioner's view is that the current penalties for severe cases of domestic abuse are too lenient and fail to reflect the severity of the crimes or the lasting trauma victims endure. Her petition states that increased sentencing is necessary to properly address domestic abuse and its devastating impact on the victims. The Scottish Government's response to the petition states that it is long-standing policy for sentencing in Scottish criminal courts to give discretion to the court to decide a sentence based on the facts and circumstances of a case. The penalties available for almost all offences are generally provided up to a maximum, but with no minimum sentence required. The response states that this gives greatest discretion and flexibility to the independent court when sentencing. The Scottish Government's view is that establishing minimum sentencing would remove discretion from the court and mean the court was unable to apply full discretion when sentencing after considering the full facts and circumstances of any case. The response sets out the protections in place to guard against sentences which, as a matter of law, are considered too lenient. The Scottish Sentencing Council is currently working on producing further sentencing guidelines in several areas. These include the current development of a draft guideline on sentencing in domestic abuse cases. A domestic abuse working group committee has been established to help in taking forward this work, and the next stage is for the Council to conduct a full public consultation on the proposed guideline. The petitioner has provided a written submission which acknowledges the Scottish Government's commitment to judicial independence and the support for the Scottish Sentencing Council's ongoing work. However, it challenges the assertion that current measures are sufficient to address the scale and severity of domestic abuse in Scotland. The petitioner states that sentencing guidelines, while useful, are not binding, and she believes that introducing minimum sentences would establish a clear baseline of accountability, while still allowing judges to apply discretion within a defined range. The petitioner argues that this approach preserves judicial independence while ensuring consistency and fairness. Unimportant issues, but do colleagues have any suggestions as to how we would proceed? Mr Torrance.
Thank you, Convener. I wonder if the committee would consider closing the petition under Rule 15.7 of Standing Orders on the basis that the Scottish Government's view is that establishing a minimum sentence would mean the court was unable to apply full discretion when sentencing after considering the full facts and circumstances of a case. There are protections in place to guard against sentences which, as a matter of law, are considered too lenient, and the Scottish Sentencing Council is currently developing a sentencing guideline for domestic abuse cases. I wonder if in closing the petition, Convener, the committee may wish to highlight that the Scottish Sentencing Council's public consultation on the proposed sentence guidelines for domestic abuse to the petitioner.
Thank you, Mr Torrance. Are members content to support the proposal? We are. So we will close the petition, but I do say to the petitioner it's an important issue that's been raised. Unfortunately, I don't think there is time left to us to properly explore in detail or interrogate the response that we've received at this point. But given that the Scottish Sentencing Council has a consultation, it may well be that that is the basis for a petition in the next session of Parliament, and I'm sure that Parliament would have the opportunity to consider it in more detail at that time. That brings us to the end of the public part of our proceedings this morning, and we now move into private session. Thank you.